Chapter 1. Dome 17. I'm 39. 35 of those years I've spent underground. Dome 17 is my home, my prison, and my homeland. Here, everything is governed by the survival protocol, the rhythm of life, our food, the number of words we're allowed per day, even our thoughts, it seems. And soon enough, the protocol might regulate those too. I'm an archivist. This morning, like every morning, I woke to the hum of ventilation and the faint buzz of the lights. Wash up, a few stretches, breakfast, fat-free protein mixed with vitamins. Then off to the repository. You're first again, Vince muttered, squeezing past the narrow shelves. He'd been my partner for 6 cycles. An engineer by training, a joker by nature. The protocol recommends arriving 15 minutes before shift start, I said. And common sense recommends sleeping as long as you can, he shot back. We sat at our terminals. The screen lit up, another stream of data. Water recycling reports, filtration system diagnostics, radiation log duplicates. Always the same. Monotonous. Reliable. Hey, Vince said quietly, they were saying in the mess hall yesterday that someone offed themselves in Dome 23. Right in the middle of a meeting. Rumors. Maybe. But it gave me the chills. He left a message, I want the sun. Can you imagine? I didn't respond. The phrase felt almost blasphemous. We live by the protocol. It forbids going to the surface, deadly radiation, mutagens, toxic clouds. As a child, I thought the sun was a myth. Later, I learned it was real, but dangerous. Too bright. Too hot. Too real. Sometimes I come across strange entries in the old archives. One report from the 6th cycle stated, radiation levels outside the dome are decreasing by 0.3% annually. But for the next 10 cycles, no change at all. The graph flatlined. Coincidence? Mistake? Or a lie? I showed the report to Vince. He skimmed it and shrugged. Maybe the level stabilized. But where's the raw data? Why do the charts look so uniform, like they were auto-generated? You're starting to sound like a defector. Don't forget, the protocol is truth. After our shift, we walked together toward the procedures hall. The air reeked of disinfectant and metal. Same faces in line. Always the same. Years pass, but people don't seem to age, frozen in place. The doctor injected me with a stimulant. Pulse, normal. Blood pressure, ideal. All by the book. Even death here comes on schedule. A supervisor stood at the front of the room, a tall man in a gray uniform. His voice devoid of emotion. Today we remember those who disobeyed. Who breached containment. Their names are erased. Their choice led to destruction. The crowd was silent. Remember, the surface is death. Salvation is within. Later, back in my cell, I sat in the dark. The only window, a black panel. Nothing beyond it. No stars, no light. Only my own reflection. I touched the glass. It was cold, like the dome itself. One thought wouldn't let go, if it's all true, why hide so much? Why does no one ask questions? Sometimes I think the real radiation isn't out there. It's inside us. And its name is fear. Chapter 2. A breach in logic. Being an archivist isn't just a job. It's a role in a play without an audience. We read, sort, amend. Sometimes it feels like we ourselves dissolve into the dust of old protocols, vanish inside spreadsheets, forget the sound of our own voice. This time, I was deep in a technical log from the air filtration system, dated cycle 62. It was ancient, almost a century and a half old. The paper had yellowed, the terminal screen crackled as if it didn't want to show the truth. But I insisted. Vince was out sick that day, or so he said. Maybe he'd just grown tired of the routine. Or maybe he sensed that I was starting to ask too many questions. The file opened with a priority tag. I copied it to the buffer and began parsing the data. Numbers aligned into neat columns: radiation levels, air composition, contamination rates, concentration of heavy particles. And here's the strange part: the readings were perfect. An entire cycle with not a single anomaly. No spikes, no drops. Even the ambient temperature held steady at -17.3 degrees Celsius. Day after day. Month after month. I blinked and scrolled back to the beginning. Could it be a retrieval error? I ran the query again, same result. Then I cross-referenced the log with an even older one, from cycle 59. The data matched. Down to the last comma. That's not possible. Even in a perfect system, there's noise, fluctuation, statistical deviation. But this? It looked like someone had copied a template and just changed the date. I made a mental note: log falsified. Off the record. I didn't print a hard copy. Any irregularity in the repository could raise suspicion. Oversight is watching. Always. That night, I returned to my cell but couldn't sleep. Numbers, charts, graphs spun in my head. What if the data wasn't just falsified, but deliberately replaced? What if the protocol hides not only the truth about the surface, but the truth about our very existence? The next morning, I asked the on-duty technician in the procedures hall. He was younger than me, with eyes dulled by routine, long past the point of surprise. "Tell me," I said, "have you ever seen a spike in radiation logs?" He shrugged. "No." "Why?" "Just curious. The stability seems unusually high." Well, the protocol was designed to eliminate instability. Everything's under control. But even control doesn't erase natural fluctuations. He stared at me. "Why are you asking this?" I went silent. Foolish to start that conversation. "Just an archive check," I muttered and walked away. Later, I sat at my terminal, staring at an old ventilation schematic. The diagram showed an external air intake, a module connected to the outside atmosphere. But all official documents claimed the air system was completely closed-loop. The log from cycle 45 stated, "External valve inspection completed. Filter replacement not required." External valve. So it's still in use? Or was? But why is it never mentioned anywhere else? I searched for visual documentation, but found that since cycle 50, all photography had been banned. Text only. Numbers only. I pressed my forehead into my palms. We live by the protocol, but the protocol no longer follows logic. It has become dogma, not a tool. A belief, not a means. What's frightening isn't just that the data is fake. What's frightening is that no one asks questions. Even when the lies drip from the screen and pool at your feet. I didn't know who I could trust. Not even myself. Chapter 3. The Trace of Rebellion. I wasn't looking for the diary. It found me. Normally, I only scanned current system logs. But that day, the terminal threw a strange access error, then suddenly offered a recovery prompt. Odd. I hadn't initiated a scan. The algorithm seemed to be following a path I hadn't set. Curiosity won out over caution. I approved the recovery. Moments later, a file appeared on screen, marked, encrypted, level 7. I knew I wasn't authorized for anything above level 3. And yet, somehow, the encryption yielded. Inside was a plain text log. Title: Diary of Technician, 112/cycles 117 to 118. I froze. Technician, 112. A name long forgotten. I'd heard of him from the older generation. He vanished, by council decision, nearly 30 years ago. The official reason, deactivation for protocol violation. At the time, I hadn't thought twice. Violators disappear. That's how it's always been. But now, I began to read. Cycle 117. Day 44. Filter fault in Block 4 again. Radiation level at the intake beyond the outer airlock, 0.32. That's lower than inside the dome's maintenance zones. The surface isn't as dangerous as they say. Cycle 117. Day 57. I checked archives back to cycle 20. Radiation has been falling steadily. Unless the trend is artificial, the surface has likely been safe for decades. Cycle 118. Day 9. Planning to inspect airlock 3. They say it's sealed, but the schematics show it's just disabled. I'll open the external hatch. If I don't return, let someone find this log. The entries ended there. I sat in silence, my hands gradually going cold. I had just read the thoughts of a living person. And he'd doubted. He'd searched. Tried to step outside. He hadn't fled. Hadn't sabotaged anything. He just wanted to know. Deactivation. Now the word no longer sounded like punishment. It sounded like execution. I copied the archive into a hidden cell on my terminal. Even if someone traced the access, there would be no record. Then, as a precaution, I cleared the command log. At lunch, I ran into Vince. He looked pale. "What happened to you?" I asked. He shrugged. Psych scan. They were checking for signs of ideological instability. Said the cases are rising. Someone from Dome 9 tried to reach the airlocks. Did they catch him? Don't think so. But oversights everywhere now. I nodded, pretending not to be surprised. But inside, I was boiling. Cases are rising. That meant, I wasn't alone. Someone else was thinking. Someone else could feel it too. The protocol had become a hollow shell of its former meaning. Later, in my cell, I kept replaying the diary entries in my mind. He was right, if radiation had truly declined that much, the surface might have already been safe when he wrote those words. And 30 years had passed since then. Which meant? It meant we were being kept here. Not for safety. For control. What if the protocol no longer served a purpose, but was still enforced out of inertia? Like a religion. Like a myth. I looked at the black panel on my cell wall. Behind it, just a wall. But now I began to doubt. Maybe what lies beyond it isn't death. Maybe it's the sky. Chapter 4. Buried Truth. Night is the only time the dome truly breathes. The ceiling lights fade to black, the corridors sink into gentle twilight, and only the occasional footsteps of patrolling guards disturb the hush. That's when I made my move. Old schematics, buried deep in the archives of the technical department, pointed me toward Zone X4. According to protocol, it was designated for equipment and communication system preservation, but the last recorded entry about it dated back nearly 50 years. Since then, silence. No maintenance, no inspections. Just a single note, access level 9 or above required. No one alive held that level of clearance. I waited for the guard shift to change. The ancient corridor doors didn't take well to haste, every second dragged like an eternity, and my heartbeat pounded like a siren in my skull. The lock at the entrance to X4 was old, but not beyond persuasion. An emergency code, unchanged since cycle 74, unlocked the engineering menu. Someone had long forgotten to update it. Or, chose not to. Inside, it was dark and damp. The air smelled of mold and machine oil. Server racks, dusty monitors, dead terminals, it all looked like the fossilized remains of some extinct beast. In a far corner, I found the storage core. The terminal was still active, but it demanded biometric access. I placed my palm, denied. So I tried a manual override. The standard protocol allowed 3 attempts. First, I entered the date of the catastrophe, March 12, 2189, denied. Second, the coordinates of Dome 17, denied. On the third try, I typed in a name, Elias Morton, Chief of Engineering a century and a half ago. I'd seen his signature on dozens of old reports. The screen flickered. Access temporarily granted. I held my breath. Before me opened the Protocol A system. The central archive. Hundreds of reports, logs, video files, things that were never meant to be seen by a common resident. Especially not by an archivist. I opened the first file, the Council report from Cycle 4. Analysis of nuclear deployment consequences. Blast radius extends 200 km from coordinates 53.49n/12.12e. Total contaminated landmass does not exceed 8%. The remainder of the planet is habitable with minimal purification measures. I read that line twice. 8%. Not 100, like we were told. The catastrophe had been local. I opened the next file, a transcript of a council session. Mass evacuation is unfeasible. Surface chaos, resource shortages. Better to retain control over an isolated population. The protocol will become both framework and faith. The people must believe there is no way out. My eyes moved across the lines, but inside me, everything was collapsing. We hadn't been saved. We'd been contained. Why? To preserve control? To avoid sharing dwindling resources? I saw the signatures, Morton. Arson. Blake. All of them celebrated as heroes in our textbooks. Saviors. Architects of the dome. But in truth, architects of a prison. The final report stated. Within 2 generations, internal doubt will fade. Access will be restricted. The protocol will become dogma. People will forget why they're here. The key is to never let them see the sky. I shut down the terminal. Stood in the dark, trembling. Not from fear, but from realization. Half my life had been a lie. And the other half, silent compliance. When I stepped back into the corridor, it felt like the walls of the dome were watching me. But now I knew, beyond those walls, there was not death. There was freedom. Or at least, the possibility of it. Chapter 5, The Blacklist. At first, it was just small things. My access to certain archives was suddenly marked as temporarily restricted. During the morning task briefing at Central Block, I was informed that my department would soon be reassigned to inspecting filtration logs, a task usually handed off to new trainees. Then a man in a black jacket without insignia began following me in the corridors. He never spoke. Just stood silently by the wall as I passed, sometimes watching my back. I knew then, they had noticed me. That night, I accessed the Internal Security Center database through an old terminal. I bypassed 3 layers of encryption using codes I had pieced together over the years from forgotten protocol fragments. There I found a file marked CL-17 scrub list. Inside, a list of names. Aliases. Archival tags. And among them, my own. Date of inclusion, 2 days ago. Risk category, level 2. Deviation tendency, confirmed. Status, surveillance initiated. If confirmed, subject to deactivation. I leaned back in the chair. The air in the room grew heavy, like the instant before an explosion. I wasn't just under suspicion. I had already been condemned. Later, in my cubicle, I heard someone standing silently outside the door. No knock. Just waiting. Then, footsteps fading away. I gathered what I needed: a flashlight, an old handheld scanner, a filtered mask, and the paper copies of archives I had managed to make. I had to leave. Now, while I still could. "You've been careless," whispered Harold, the senior technician I had shared synth tea with for years in the mess hall. "They smelled out like coal smells air." "They?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "The protocol's not just an algorithm," he looked around. "It's a faith. And apostates here don't get therapy." "And you?" "I stay quiet. And survive." "You weren't so lucky. You went looking." "The summons came in the morning. No explanation. No reason. Just an officer stating the time, 9 o'clock, Block E. Everyone in Dome 17 knew Block E. Few came back from it. I didn't go. Instead, I headed for the emergency hatch on the technical level. Once used for cable routing, now sealed, but not forever. The lock was old model, and gave in to a universal key. The air reeked of mildew and burnt wiring. But in that smell, I could sense freedom. I descended, deeper, to where the security system stuttered and failed. Where trackers had no signal. Behind me, the dome breathed unease. I knew they'd soon find my empty bed. And on their monitors would appear the message: "Subject evading. Reclassify to Category 3. Deactivation, no confirmation required." But I would be gone. Now I hid among forgotten corridors, where the lights had long gone out, where fallen walls shielded old conduits, and even the cameras had ceased to care. Only here could I think. The protocol was more than I had imagined. It wasn't protection, it was a structure of faith, built to enforce order through fear. Not an algorithm, but a religion of machine thought. And anyone who asked questions became a heretic. I wasn't the first. And likely wouldn't be the last. But I would do what the others could not. I would find the way out. Chapter 6, Light. I climbed the stairwell, step by step, each movement echoing as a dull ache through my back, from exhaustion or fear, I no longer knew. Warning lights flickered red along the walls, but no alarm sounded. These levels, it seemed, had long since slipped from the system's control. The final airlock stood before me, a massive door with a warning etched into the metal. Exit only in case of extreme necessity. Violation, death. My fingers trembled as I activated the starter. The door responded with a deep metallic groan, the stench of rust hitting my face. Beyond the heavy steel barrier lay a short corridor, as brief and sharp as a breath before a leap. At the far end, another hatch. The last one. Inside, it was cold. Dry. A single emergency lamp buzzed dimly overhead. The panel on the door blinked green. Atmosphere unstable. Confirm exit. I confirmed. The door opened slowly. And beyond it, blinding white light. I instinctively stepped back, eyes seared by the sudden glare. But then, one step forward. Another. And I emerged. It swept over me. First, silence. Pure, ringing, absolute silence. Not the hum of ventilation, not the groan of pipes. This was alive. Natural. Then, warmth. I lifted my face. The sun. Not filtered through monitors or screens. Real. Direct. It struck my skin, seared my eyes, and in that burning, there was more truth than in 100 protocols. I stood still, taking it in. The wind ran fingers through my hair. The air was dry, but bearable. It smelled of dust, of grass, of something almost forgotten, like the scent of childhood long buried. Before me stretched ruins. Skeletons of other complexes. Domes cracked by time, half-collapsed towers, antennas broken and left to rust. It all looked like a stage after a long-forgotten play. The people had left. Or maybe, never made it out. But the air was clean. The dosimeter I carried showed stable, safe readings. The atmosphere, viable. I walked among the debris like moving through a graveyard. No signs of life. No one. Only traces that they had once been here. On the wall of a ruined station, I saw faded words. There is light. But not everyone deserves it. I didn't know who had left it. Maybe that technician from the journal. Maybe someone else who made it out, and never returned. The sun rose higher. I sat down on a slab of concrete, staring into the distance. Mountains lined the horizon. Not blackened by radioactive dust like in the training modules. Green. And far off, on one of the slopes, trees. Life. I closed my eyes. Inside me, everything collided, fear, anger, hope. Why had they left us underground? Why didn't anyone come to tell the truth? But maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe people had learned to be afraid. They clung to the protocol, to concrete walls, to the illusion of safety. But truth was too bright. Like the sun, it blinds and demands more than obedience. It demands choice. And that is more terrifying than death. I looked up into the sky. So blue it felt unreal. And I knew. I wouldn't go back. Not like that. Chapter 7. Down the spiral. They erased me. No name, no access code, no biometric signature remained in the central registry. My cell had been wiped clean, and under status, a single word appeared: excluded. To Dome 17, I no longer existed. And that gave me freedom, in exchange for becoming a ghost. I returned through an old maintenance shaft once used to store decommissioned tech. It had been sealed off, but not thoroughly, just blocked with concrete slabs. I spotted a crack in one of them. Light seeped through. When I made it back inside, back to the metallic walls, digital displays, and the hum of filters, I didn't shake. I knew what I was doing. I wanted to see the end from within. I was a shadow now. I had become what they used to call a non-classified variable, a threat that slipped between the layers of the system, capable of disrupting the protocol's design. I slept in an emergency closet, hidden behind a cabinet full of broken scanners. I scavenged food from the recyclers, where I could sometimes find scraps of old rations. Once a day, I turned on a receiver and listened to the system's background signal. It had a particular rhythm that told you if the alert level had been raised, if patrols were searching. But the alarm soon faded. They stopped looking. They weren't hunting me. Because they had already decided, I was dead. On the 5th day, I slipped into the restricted archive zone. Crawled through a gap under a sealed door, made my way to the ventilation level, and from there, into the old protocol vault. There, buried beneath layers of dust and holographic locks, I found what I was looking for. Not just lists of the disappeared. Not just dates of deactivations. I found others like me. Beneath the technical sector, in the space between levels, a shadow city existed. Abandoned modules. Old lift shafts. Repurposed storage bays. And within them, people. "You made it?" a tall man with a scar above his eye asked. He introduced himself as Elias. He used to be an energy node operator. Vanished 2 years ago. I saw the sun, I told him. Then you're no longer one of them, he said. More than a dozen lived in that hideout. All of them, dead on paper. An archivist like me. A filtration engineer. An old programmer with a mechanical arm, he showed me how to disable thermal sensors. They called themselves the lower cycle, the protocol's underside. "We're not rebels," said a woman named Lena. "We just want to live without submitting to lies." I listened to them. Watched as they pieced life together from the system's scraps. Saw them fix lamps, reroute running water, forge their own access keys. They were fragments of humanity in a world hollowed out by automation. "Why don't you go outside?" I asked. "Because not everyone's ready," Elias replied. "We've lived down here too long. The surface means freedom, but also fear. And here, at least we know the rules." He was right. The dome was a cage, but a familiar one. Out there was the unknown. No guarantees. No structure. But I knew I couldn't stay. Not anymore. I had to go back, to the sky. And maybe, lead others there too. That evening, I sat on a steel beam, staring at the dim light slipping through cracks in the dome. Below, the filters whispered. Somewhere deep within, the system still pulsed, ancient as the lie it protected. And I knew, another spiral had ended. But the next one had already begun. Chapter 8. The final level. I had passed through every level. Archives, forbidden zones, the subspaces between sections where bare steel beams hummed like broken strings. I heard the system breathing, not the rhythmic, ordered pulse described in official reports, but a jagged, faltering rasp. The protocol was aging. But it still breathed. Like a beast too weak to hunt, yet still guarding its decaying domain. I climbed back up the same path that had once led me to the Shadow City. Through the shaft where emergency lights still blinked, a flickering memory of the past. One last glance into the darkness below. "Are you sure?" Elias asked. He stood at the bottom edge, wrapped in shadow. "No," I answered. "But staying means accepting the lie." He nodded. "Then go. Just remember, the truth outside is no cleaner than the lie within." The door resisted. An old airlock, officially sealed forever according to the protocol. I had seen the sky before. I knew it was real. But still, as I stepped onto the surface a second time, this time for good, my heart clenched. The sun pierced my eyes. The air tickled my nostrils with dust and the scent of dry grass. I walked across a gray plain overgrown with yellow weeds, past the ruins of old communication towers. The wind moaned somewhere, carried through torn domes. I reached the observatory sector, remnants of an ancient research module. There was a transmitter there. Ancient, but I knew how to bring it back to life. I wanted to speak to those still living below. The world has changed. It isn't hostile. It's waiting for us. But the transmitter stayed silent. Its batteries had long since died. The signal had vanished, along with the hope of those who once guarded it. I stood alone. Beneath a real sky. And suddenly I understood, no one was coming. Those still underground didn't want to know. It was easier to believe in radiation, in poisoned winds, in catastrophe, than to face the truth. Their fear was the protocol's foundation. I shattered one of the old helmets, the one worn by a technician whose logs I had read in the archives. The metal split like an egg. Inside, there was a photo, a woman and a child, faded but alive. He had wanted to return to them. He came out. He was killed, not by radiation. By people. By the protocol. I buried the helmet in the earth. And beside it, I planted a piece of hull as a marker. I scratched onto it. The living were here. I never went back. I stayed, not in shadow, not in the protocol. I became myself. Sometimes I still hear a hum, like the system calling me back. As if someone below is whispering my name. But I no longer answer. Not because I forgot. But because I chose. Choice. That's what they took from us. And now, as I walk a path pushing through broken stations, as I breathe, truly, for the first time, I understand. The ruin wasn't that the system collapsed. The ruin was that we once mistook it for truth.